Welcome everyone. My name is Joel Lindstrom. I'm glad to be presenting here at DynamicsCon. A little bit about me. I am the principal Power Platform Architect for Hitachi Solutions. I've been there about 14 years, and my main focus is Power Platform, Power Apps, Power Automate, and I also still do some Dynamics 365. I've also been a Microsoft Business Applications MVP for 13 years. So what are we talking about today? We're going to be talking about you're a Dynamics person, meaning you've used Dynamics 365, could be CE, could be F&O, or you might still call it CRM. You've been doing that for a long time, and now you're hearing all about this awesome thing called the Power Platform. How do you move from being just Dynamics-centric to being a Power Platform person? What does that really mean? Where's that line? We're going to talk about how it's the same platform. You may not realize it, but it's the exact same platform as Dynamics 365. We'll talk about the common data service. We'll talk about why you may want to start doing Canvas apps. We'll talk about strategies for how you move your flows, and we'll talk about governance and all this stuff, because these tools are great, but you still have to keep some control over it and protect your important data and business processes. And so we'll get into as well as how some things are coming together in the roadmap as well. So I'm really excited to be here and really excited to get started. So let's get going. So this might be you. This is Mary. She's been doing Dynamics 365 for a long time, and she's hearing about the Power Platform and Power Apps. And she's saying, well, why should I use Power Apps? I already have Dynamics 365. And how do I use all these connectors and everything and keep everything safe? So these are great questions and something everybody's asking. The first thing to keep in mind is it's the same platform. So the underlying platform of Dynamics 365, what you call Dynamics 365 and call the database behind Dynamics 365, is actually called the Common Data Service. You might have heard the DataFlex name going around. That's not happening anymore. It's now Common Data Service still. So under the Common Data Service is the data platform that undergirds not just Dynamics, but also Power Apps, Power Automate, Power Virtual Agent, and it works great with Power BI as well. And then Dynamics 365, specifically the customer engagement type apps, are simply just the first-party apps built on top of the Power Platform. So you're using sales, using customer service, using finance, you're using retail, other things like that. You're using the Common Data Service. And if you build custom model-driven or Canvas apps, or you build flows, those all leverage the Common Data Service as well. So what is the Common Data Service? Is it something new? No, you're using it today if you're a Dynamics person. It all started way back in CRM version 1.0 and 1.2. That was the origin of what now is the Common Data Service. Originally, it was the Dynamics 365 database on-premise built on SQL. And they enhanced it over time, moved up the version of SQL, added capabilities. Sometime around 2008, they added some enterprise features around transparent data encryption, other things like that. But then going up to 2011 to 2013, that was really when we went to the cloud and we had CRM Online. And then growing there around this point, around 2016, early 2017, Microsoft rolled out Power Apps, and they also rolled out this database called the Common Data Service, which was kind of a way for F&O and CE to come together, but it wasn't very successful. And then they decided we've already got this mature database platform called Dynamics 365. Let's just make that the Common Data Service. So that's when what happened in late 2017 was Dynamics 365 and CDS 2.0 happened in 2018, and that's really where we are today. So if you're using Power Apps with the Common Data Service or Power Automate using Common Data Service, it's the exact same platform as Dynamics 365. So when it comes to Common Data Service, a lot of people call it a database, but it's a lot more than a database. The value the Common Data Service brings is it brings together the best of Microsoft's database technologies, such as Azure SQL, Azure Blob, as well as other technologies like Cosmos DB. It also packages together all the things you already know, such as security and other pieces like that, but it's been enhanced to also, for example, attachments now go in Azure Blob, and other things like logs are handled differently. So it gives you a much more robust coverage, which you benefit already from in Dynamics. But it's just going over some of the things that it brings along with just core database technologies. First of all, security. So the security roles you know and love from Dynamics still apply when you come to Power Apps. The logic around calculated fields, roll-up fields, plugins, etc. All that applies for Canvas Power Apps as well as model-driven and Dynamics apps. So for example, if you build Power Apps without Common Data Service, you've got to build a lot of logic into the front end of the app when you're using SharePoint and other things like that, where we can benefit from the calculated fields, the roll-up fields, put those at the system layer. And really, if you have 5 apps that are using the same entities and business processes, this is a value because you don't have to duplicate that. And if you change it in one app, you can change it in all of them by doing that server side. Your data, I already mentioned with the capacity model, it's not all stored as blobs in the same database. You're using Azure Blob for attachments, using Azure SQL for data, using the best storage technology for the type of data you're storing, and you don't have to do anything differently. It's all seamless. And so integration, you've got the APIs, you've got some new things called data flows, which are one-way integration processes. You have automatic turnkey export to Azure Data Lake. So all that great stuff. So if you're using Dynamics now and you want to grow to Power Apps, what you need to know is there's different kinds. Now you might already be familiar with model-driven apps because that's the Dynamics kind of immersive app for the bigger applications. You also probably know portals as Dynamics portals. Those are now Power Apps portals and broadening the use case for those. But Canvas apps, those are the pixel perfect, a lot of people think mobile, but they're task focused. So let's look at those in high level. And then what we'll do is we'll go in and show actually an example of how these work together. So if you're already using unified interface, you know model-driven apps. But the beautiful thing is you can now build custom model-driven apps that don't have Dynamics licensing and have other scenarios. We used to call a scenario XRM or anything you want relationship management. And that's really what the model-driven is for. If you want to manage an overall process, like a big immersive process, like a sales process or customer service process, model-driven is the way to go. But then you have Canvas apps, which are task-focused. And I don't mean just single tasks. What I mean by this is I need the delivery guy to go deliver the package and get a signature, or I need my shop floor people to take something from point A in the manufacturing process to point B, or I need a salesperson to update her opportunities close date. That's what I mean by task focus. It can be multiple tasks, but it's driven more by the user experience. And since these are all built on top of Common Data Service, you can have the model-driven app with your bigger application, and you can have the Canvas apps handling point solutions that all use the same back-end platform. So that gives you a lot more flexibility. So the question is, why should I use Canvas apps when I already have Dynamics? The answer isn't to replace Dynamics, but in every Dynamics deployment, there's things that are maybe clickier than you want them to be. Something that, take the delivery person or the teller at the bank. They open up the Dynamics or the model-driven app and have to click through menus and search and all this stuff. It's very clicky for that. Now, it's great if you're the admin or somebody managing an overall process, but for those point solutions, it can be too clicky. And so one great answer to this is to extend what you have in Dynamics and make it more user-friendly and build it around the process, and add to that the 350 connectors that are in the Power Platform. The fact I can have, if I need to integrate with ServiceNow or Salesforce or SharePoint, extending the SharePoint document integration, I can do that with a Canvas app. So why is Dynamics better with Canvas apps? I already mentioned some of this. If you have a complex process where you need to manage an end-to-end process, model-driven is the way to go. Your Dynamics app is great for that. And the first-party solutions Microsoft builds around opportunities and field service and things like that, you definitely don't want to just rip those out and replace them with a Canvas app because there's a lot of complexity there. But the fact there's 350 connectors and you can be more driven by the user experience means Canvas apps is great for extending what you're doing with Dynamics and also answering totally other questions, because you have a group that's using Dynamics. There's a lot of other manual processes and paper processes and Excel spreadsheets and Access databases floating around. So just again, it's not comparing these two. If somebody says to me, Joel, I want to build an application that manages my sales process or my field service process or something like that, model-driven is the way to go. If, on the other hand, they say, I want to give users an app so they can do X, that's more of a task-focused thing, and it's more around the user experience, that's where Canvas apps really shine. And biggest thing is it's not a competition. It's not an either or. You know, there's people who love Canvas apps and never use model-driven apps. There's people who only know model-driven apps and don't do Canvas apps. I don't think that's the right answer. It's use the right tool for the job. They have the same data, same users, same system, things like PCF controls, calculated rollup fields, flows and workflows, business rules, all those are the same between the platforms. If somebody, at the same time, one person's updating a record in the model-driven app, another person's creating a record in the Canvas app, the result is the same. So I'm going to go through just an example here of how these work together. And this is an example from the Microsoft COVID emergency response solution, the healthcare solution. So with COVID, you have the need to manage beds and how much PPE equipment you have at your facility and other things like that. How many people are being discharged this week? This is where Canvas app is awesome, because somebody at the facility has real specific things they need to do, capturing data as they go. And that's where, you know, from a single facility with this task-specific focus, this is a great way to do it. But imagine, though, if you were at the corporate headquarters and you have not just one facility, but you need to manage all your facilities, and you need to see what's the equipment like at each location, or how many people are being discharged in total, or you want to see where do we have, you know, staff shortages and where do we have extra staff we might be able to move over there. That's where the model-driven app is key. And again, this is the same common data service environment, same data. It's just, what's your user experience? Use the right tool for the job, use the right experience for the job. So as you get started with Canvas apps, one thing people coming from a Dynamics perspective are used to seeing things a certain way. They're used to the model-driven layout. And the great thing about model-driven is it does a lot of the work for you. You have the header for the app is the same. You have the save button's always the right place. You have a common metaphor where you start with it like a dashboard and a sitemap where you go in and you see there's pre-made form layouts, which is optimized for large deployments, large applications, because you need that consistency. But if I'm moving to Canvas apps, one thing, you know, I will see is I'll see that, you know, I have to make a lot more decisions. I have to decide what I want the layout to look like. I have to, you know, if I want the save button to be in a certain place, I want it to navigate to another form once I save it, I need to make those decisions. And that can be a little bit intimidating to start with. But there's some things you can do to really make it a little bit more like model-driven apps and make it a little bit more, especially if you have users who are currently using model-driven and you want to introduce Canvas apps to them. There's several things that you can do to make your life as the maker easier and also make the life of your users easier in making that transition. And so I'm going to show you a few of those. So now I'm in make.powerapps.com, the maker portal, which, by the way, is the new maker experience for both model-driven and Canvas apps. So from here, let's just go ahead and create an app. First of all, I'm going to create one from my data. And so this is where, again, if you've never made a Canvas app, this is a great way to do it, because it gives you a way to quickly have an app, get a quick win, and then from there, so I'm going to say, for example, choose account, and then it's going to build a sample 3-screen app that has a list screen with a gallery. It'll have a detailed screen and then an edit screen. So it's a great way to look at that. So as I make this, one thing you'll see is if I'm looking at this on a phone, it actually looks pretty good. But if you're looking at this in browser, this is pretty overwhelming because you'll see that, for example, this font is a lot bigger. Also, this is phone format, so you probably will not want to, use this inside of a browser. But if you're using this on a large monitor like I have, you're going to want to make it more data dense. And also, you're going to want to use some of the capabilities you have inside of Model Driven when you're building out your Canvas app. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a Canvas app from blank. And we're going to go with a tablet format because I want to fill out the whole screen. We'll call it test app to get started. So you're going to now be presented with a blank canvas for which you can lay out whatever you want. So the most common, so first of all, I got to give it a data source. So let's go ahead and do the same account entity here. So now I've done that, what I want to do is I want to put together some kind of a display. The common, like what you saw in the example from the build from data, was what's called the gallery, which is a simple list control. And so I'm going to go ahead and add a gallery. Let's choose a vertical gallery. And then from here, I'm going to choose the layout. I want to have the title, subtitle, and body layout. That gives us 3 lines of text. So first thing is, to make this easier for you as a maker, one thing that you can do is, after I choose my layout, I'm going to choose the account entity because that's my data source. So one thing, as coming from the Dynamics world, you know what system views are. You know how you're going to create your logic and your filter and your layout and system view. Well, those can actually be used with Canvas apps as well. So I don't have to necessarily write a formula to get this, for example, the My View. I want this to be when the user runs this app, I want just to show their stuff. So from here, I can just go to views and I can choose the My Active Accounts view. That way, you see it automatically writes the formula for you here. And so I don't have to do anything else. And I love to create my filters as system views because that way, if I have a filter for accounts that meet a certain criteria in my model-driven app, I can reflect that there. So another thing though is I can change the size of these fonts. When you're working with a gallery, you need to keep in mind the first one is kind of like sets the pattern. So I don't need to go change each line. But if I want to make this different, and it by default goes to like 20, I always, if this is going to be run on the screen, I always go to like 12 because it's a little bit smaller, but it will make a lot more information appear on the screen. So if you change that to 12, that's a little bit better. Then you can drag these up, you can shorten this, and boom, you got a lot more information. But the other thing that starting out you might not recognize is you can also add additional controls to this. So if I want to add another label, say over here, I can get a much richer layout. And so now I can have 5, 10 fields. And if I wanted to be tabular like a view, I could do that. I could take this gallery and lay out fields side by side. So the other thing is when you're getting started, you'll see this and say, okay, if I want to have this where it starts here and then goes to that screen, I need to do that all on different screens, which is, I think that's okay for a phone app. But when I'm in a tablet app or I want to see it all on one screen, it's very you got a lot of real estate here to work with. So one thing I like to do is kind of mimic the quick create form. And what you might not realize is you could actually put a form on the same screen. And so if I go to form, and let's just go with edit form. One little tip with Canvas apps, you really don't need to use the display form. Display form is read only, but an edit form can have a display mode of disabled. And so if you do disabled, then it will effectively function as a display form rather than a edit form. Okay, so I'm going to connect this to my data source for accounts, and it will automatically add the 3 primary fields for it. You can change that as well. Then let's just go and change the items property of this to gallery 1, which is our gallery name. and select it. You notice the IntelliSense automatically specifies that. So now if I select this account, it's going to do that. So this is a great way to save on real estate. I like to put as much in a single form as I can, especially when I'm on the bigger layout. That way, again, it feels a little bit more like, like you have with like quick view forms or quick create forms, and it also makes it just more data dense. The other thing you can do is do a data table. If you just want that view layout like you have inside of Dynamics, maybe consider doing a data table instead. And data tables are somewhat like galleries, but they have some key differences. So if I make this data table account, and I should probably remove my gallery so it doesn't get all jumbled there, you'll see there instantaneously you have more of what you might think of as a view layout. The benefit to a gallery, and you can also for a data table, you can also choose system views. So if I want this to be the My Active Accounts view, I could do that as well. And so you'll see here that you can also, one nice thing here is it's a little bit easier to keep things lined up. It automatically puts in that table, but it's a little bit less customizable than a gallery. With gallery, you have a lot of flexibility to customize it. You actually have more options when you select items. So you can still, though, have an on select property here that you can have it populate the selected item in the edit form like we showed before. So again, if you want to make this more data dense, want to make it show more data, doing things like using a data table and also using the view property will make it a lot easier for you as a maker. So that's how you make your Canvas apps a little bit more like model-driven in Dynamics and make them more data dense. So let's talk about Power Automate, because the sister or brother or whatever you want to say of Power Apps is Power Automate. And a lot of people have heard how workflows will at some point go away. That's not exactly true. Real-time workflows aren't going anywhere for the time being. But if it's a background process, an asynchronous process, you need to strongly consider A, not adding any new ones, and B, starting to replace them with Power Automate. Power Automate has a lot of benefits, such as it's a more visual designer. It also makes it easy to do things you can't even think about doing with workflow. For example, you can relate records that aren't related to each other. You can get all the child records and do something with them. Just a lot of really useful things there. So for especially background processes, what I like to do is I like to start with the big ones first, because everybody's got a million different workflows. And a lot of them are very simple. Like, let's send somebody an email when this happens. Those are fairly simple. But for the ones that we might have some old, back when CodePlex was a thing, a lot of people got workflow assemblies from there and use them when they were pseudo unsupported code. Those are really good candidates, or things that you might have written your own workflow assemblies to do that you now can do with things like list records and relate and non-relate record steps. Looking for ways to consolidate. People that have Dynamics for multiple years, what they find is it turns into the house that no architect would have planned, because they keep adding and adding and adding. I see customers with 25 workflows fire on appointment whenever they create a new one. So those are really good ones to look at too. The ones that have just a lot of redundant steps, consolidate them into other flows. And then we have plugins. Now plugins are still great, but there's a much lower need for them. So start with the more complex ones, the background processes, and start replacing those and set a rule that we're not going to create any new background workflows. We're not going to add technical debt. We're going to create all those as Power Automate flows. So the other use case for Power Apps, besides extending the process or building apps beyond what you have with Dynamics, is let's take something that is currently manual, or something that we do inside Dynamics that might need 3 or 4 clicks, and let's create an embedded Canvas app where we can use the connectors. We can do other things like that that will make it easier for us, easier for the user. So you can embed Canvas apps up to 3 per form now, and you can it will pass the value of the record to it. So I'm going to give you a quick example of how that works. All right, so in the maker experience here, we're going to go to the data tab. Now I would probably do that from a solution, but for example's sake, we're just going to go into the entity configuration and we're going to show that really quickly. So let's just go, for example, to account. Now let's just say, for example, we want the related contacts to show up on the form, but we want to add more detail to them. Maybe we want to have, a picture of them. Maybe we want to have other information, maybe coming from a connector from a different system or something like that. So we can go to the form for, say, the account entity. And then what we can do is we have to go to the editing experience, but this is one of those things we still have to switch over to the classic experience. So you remember the Dynamics configuration experience. I can hit the switch to classic button here, and from there I just need to pull up the legacy form configuration for the form where I want to embed the Canvas app. Now this is one key piece here. You have to build your Canvas app from the form configuration. There are workarounds to take one you've already built. Matter of fact, I wrote a CRM tip of the day about how to do that, but it's not fully supported. And if you do that, you run into problems moving it between environments, where if you create them from the maker experience, from the classic maker experience, then you generally will not have any problem moving them between environments. Okay, so now that I'm on 3, 2, 1, now that I'm on the legacy form customization, what you have to keep in mind is you need to bind the control for the embedded Canvas app to a field. And you want it to be a field that contains data. So what I'm going to do, and it could be really any field, but you want it to be a field that you're pretty sure will contain data. I'm going to add the account name field here. And then from there, I'm going to click on Change Properties to pull up the property window. Then I'm going to go to the Control tab and add a control and choose Canvas app right here. So I'm going to add that. I want to set this to display. And one new thing, if you played with these originally when they came out in preview, it originally just worked in the browser. It now works on phones and tablets. So if you use Dynamics or model-driven app in mobile, you can do that. Then you simply hit the Customize button, and that will pull up the Power Apps Maker experience. And from there, you'll be able to add whatever you want to this app, which then will be displayed inside of a frame on your model-driven form. Okay, so what you'll notice is it automatically put those same 3 fields that we had in when we would create our Canvas app before. But you'll see if you look at the item at the property for these fields. So what you'll notice is it added a component to the app called model-driven form integration. That gives us the tie to the record in which this is embedded. This is why you can't just take an app you created previously and put that in there. So this gives you that, so you can then reference any field that's on the form except for the lookup fields. Then if you wanted to add additional things, you could also add any of those connectors to this app. So any of the 350 connectors from SharePoint to Salesforce or whatever, you could put in there, and then could add information in the gallery or data table from any of those connectors as well. So that's embedded Canvas apps, very powerful. A lot of people who used dialogues in the legacy UI, classic UI, have switched over to using embedded Canvas apps. One little tip there is if you use business rules to dynamically show and hide the field to which the Canvas app embedded is bound, the embedded Canvas app will conditionally show and hide. So that's a really easy way. Like, for example, you want to make a little dialogue that pops up and asks a question when a certain condition is true. That's a way to make it so it's not showing all the time, but automatically just shows up. So now we've covered kind of the technology of Canvas apps and best practices for switching your workflows to flows. You might be asking, well, how do bigger question is, now that we have Power Platform, we really can move from having the one big monolithic application that tries to do everything to micro apps, where we don't have to put everything in the kitchen sink in this one monster large app. And we can also empower our business departments and users to create their own applications. So how do we do that? How do we do that securely? And one of the tools is the Center of Excellence Starter Kit. Microsoft has this great tool that has a combination of flows and Power Apps for that can help you monitor and alert you, but also improve your user adoption. But there's a step before that, which is the COE Starter Kit doesn't equal a Center of Excellence. You need a Center of Excellence, and a Center of Excellence combines several things. It's built around these pillars, and I'm not going to take credit for this idea. This is there's a framework called the Power Platform Adoption Framework, which is great, that has been, multiple partners and Microsoft have contributed to. And Andrew Welch and, the partner of the year for Power Platform was responsible for driving it. And really what you need to know is you can't have it be weighted too much towards the governance side or the user side. It has to balance both of them. You have to have good governance over the platform, but you also have to have security, but you also have to have empowered users, especially if you're going to get user adoption of the platform, especially if you're going to grow from a large central application to maybe that plus other smaller apps that are built by your users, by your citizen developers, and by your business groups. And a good center of excellence includes, a good center of excellence includes the three pillars or the three legs to the stool, if you will, of the IT, of the business, and of the users. And you have to be capable of generating quick wins, maybe driving the first few apps, but then partnering with the different people, because all those connectors you saw, like Exchange and Salesforce and ServiceNow, each of those has their own constituencies within your organization. And you're going to have to make sure they're comfortable with it, and then have a system of trust where we lock down things that should be locked down, but for other things, we have them more open so that people can benefit from it. And it kind of looks like this, where the best cases, the people who are most successful, have this all coming together. You're also going to want to revisit your environments, because most Dynamics people have a dev, a UAT, and a production environment. That's not necessarily the answer anymore. You might have that for your most critical apps, but for things that are, for example, personal productivity, things where people are automating something for themselves and two other users, those might not go in your same environment as your Dynamics. Just because Common Data Service is the same platform does not mean they need to be the same database. And then you've got this middle ground, which is things that are important but not mission critical. And then you've got your ERP and your CRM and the really important critical stuff. That's what IT owns. And so it's breaking that down based on criticality, centralized responsibility, and the criticality of the workload to have apps set up. And Microsoft has made this much easier. Back in the day, a year ago, it cost money to add environments. Now you can add as many environments as you want as long as you have storage. And so you can have multiple environments. And many customers of ours now are moving to not just the core entities environments, but also different environments. And then there's DLP rules and security and things like that unique to each of those environments. And it's like an onion. It has layers. And so layer one is AD. You got to be an AD member. You got to have a license, either an Office license or a Power Apps or a Dynamics license. And then within each environment, you have roles. Now, if the environment has a Common Data Service database, that's your security roles. If you don't, there's Power Platform roles for who can be a maker, who can be a user. And then there's other things like cross-tenant inbound and outbound, where I want to have certain services work. For example, organization one can connect to two, but two can't connect to one. There's a lot you can do. So it's understanding these layers and then laying out an environment security. So for example, if you got Azure AD Premium, you can set up conditional access levels that say, certain services are only available in certain areas, and add to that the data loss prevention or DLP rules. So for Dynamics people, they're the same security roles. They're managed the same way. You got the pie pieces, you got the cumulative roles. You now have the ability to add them to AD security group. So that's another thing. If you're a large company, that makes it a lot easier. And then it's just considering for each environment, what services are we comfortable making available versus what should we restrict? You know, what licensing is needed to use and make these apps? Who should be a maker versus who should be a user? This applies to your Flow as well as your Power Apps. And solutions. One thing to keep in mind is a lot of people get started with Power Platform as part of Office and SharePoint, which is great. But as a Dynamics user, you know that you should use solutions because that's the vehicle that source code is managed by, where you can move entire solutions between environments. And so especially for your most critical apps and flows, they should all go in solutions. And if you go to make.powerapps.com, you can use the same solutions you use for Dynamics and add Canvas apps and flows to them as either managed or unmanaged. And let's talk about licensing. Everybody's favorite topic, but this is one area where as a Dynamics person, this might be in your benefit because you got to keep in mind, Dynamics at list price of $95 per user has a lot of value, but it's not needed by everybody, especially with model-driven and Canvas apps and flows that don't use those first-party apps or entities. They might use accounts and contacts and activities, but they don't need cases or field service. So for those people, the Power Apps licenses gets them the full common data service, model-driven apps, just like in Dynamics, just without the first-party specific apps. And you can have a mixture. You don't have to have everybody have the $95 user. Then if people just need a minimal number of apps, either model-driven or Canvas apps, there's a per app license that includes up to 2 different apps. So if you're rolling this out and you say, you know what, I want to roll this out, but I don't want to buy a Dynamics license for everybody. Good news is you don't have to. And you can have a mixture of different license types within even the same environments right now. And so last thing before we wrap up for questions, let's look ahead to the roadmap, how these are even coming together even more. The thing I'm most excited about with the Wave 2 2020 release is what's called responsive Canvas pages. And so responsive Canvas pages let us create Canvas, not just embedded apps, but whole Canvas app pages that could have multiple screens, but putting them inside of your model-driven app. So from the sitemap, you could have not just something embedded in a model-driven form, but a whole Canvas app right there embedded in the app. And they're responsive, fully responsive, just like your model-driven apps are. And they're going to provide, as you see the second screenshot here, just like with dashboards, they're going to have standard layout templates that are going to make it a lot easier for people. You can do responsive Canvas apps today, but it takes some jury rigging, where this is going to make that easier, more standard, and is something that I think is really going to make these technologies come even closer together. So where you have something that's kind of in the middle where, you know what, I love the flexibility of Canvas apps, but I love the structure of model-driven apps and dashboards. This is going to be great because it will give me the best of both worlds. So just wrapping up, Power Platform Dynamics, again, same platform. There's different metaphors for Canvas apps and model-driven apps, but keeping in mind the capabilities of both, where you got the connectors with Canvas apps, you've got the more immersive interface of model-driven apps, and being able to use these with the same common data service, you can really extend your Dynamics environment and Dynamics deployment to answer a lot more problems and to solve challenges outside of what you're currently using Dynamics for. And build micro apps, build micro apps that will empower users. And that I think really is the key of why you as a Dynamics person should adopt the Power Platform as well, is empowering users, giving them tools that are easier to use, that meet the needs they have. And keep in mind, review your licensing. If it's been several years, maybe you're coming off of a 3-year EA deal, it's time to review it, because 9 times out of 10 with the Power Platform licensing, there's bound to be some users that you maybe can move to the less expensive Power Apps licensing, or even introduce new licenses like the per user app or the per app license that don't currently use the system, that would benefit from some functionality you can deliver through it. Thank you for this opportunity to present at DynamicsCon. I've really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to all the other sessions as well.